I'm very super excited tonight that we have this wonderful panel here to help us celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month and talk about a little bit about history of Hispanics in Kyle. And so I'd like to start with each of you introducing yourself and maybe giving us a little background of your family history in Kyle, your own and your family history in Kyle. And we'll probably only have enough time to ask the whole panel a few questions tonight. And if any of you are interested in coming back in a later month and doing more in-depth talking about your history in Kyle, we would like that to know that as well. So I guess we'll go ahead and start here with Abel Tenorio.
My name's Abel Tenorio. Born and raised in Kyle, born in 1946. Never left, been here all my life. And my parents were born and raised in Kyle too. And my mother was born in 1918. My father was born in 1913. And so we go back, way back. It's a long time.
Okay.
Yeah, David, my name is Domingo Castilleja. I was born and raised here in 1944. And my parents, my dad used to work at Driftwood as a cowboy. My mom used to work in Lockhart, and then they met and raised 12 of us here in Kyle. So we're located on North Street at the end of the, I guess you might say the eastern side where it ends up at the next to the railroads. It was quite of uprising, humble, but it was a lot of love in the little house we were raised in. We spent a lot of time in the cotton fields initially. And but my dad was a very, very adamant of education. And I'd like to thank you because this is a proper place to hold something like this, books, because that's what I was raised in. I've been reading since I was in seventh grade when I got an award for reading the most books in the seventh grade.
Who's your teacher?
Miss Mabel Kretschmeyer. And I owe a lot to her and Coach Mo Johnson. They were very instrumental in the way I pursued my life. Other than my parents, I have a lot of admiration for the both of them. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Miguel Zuniga. I'm a city council member now. I was born in Nuevo León, Mexico. My parents moved here in the early 1980s, so I'm a first generation Mexican American. But I know less of Mexico now, and I grew up here in Kyle. My dad wanted to own something, and we were renting a small house by the railroad tracks in Martinez Loop. And it was a real small house. And I remember they wanted something better, the American dream for us that they did not have. And my mom really believed that if I studied a lot, studied hard, the opportunities would be here. And so my dad found a landowner in Uland that offered to sell him like a quick claim or deed. So we moved to Uland, but I was very fortunate that Uland was in the Hayes School District boundaries. So I was commuted on a school bus. And I went to Kyle Elementary. I appreciated how much this country was offering people. There was a free lunch in the morning. There were teachers that really wanted to help you learn. And living in Uland, I had a lot of time to think on those bus rides. And so I would do the work, schoolwork and stuff. And my mom would always ask me when I got home, what did you do in school? She was very involved. They couldn't offer me more, but what they did offer me was time to think about my future. And so I knew that I wanted to do something that would have an impact when I grew up, because I did see how my father worked very hard. And so he did give me that work ethic. And my mom gave me the belief in that you could become what you wanted to by creating opportunities. And that's a lot of my background.
And who was your first teacher?
My first teacher was Miss Davila, I believe, Miss Guerrero, and in second grade I had Miss Faulkner. And I remember in middle school I had Miss Newberry. I remember also when the space shuttle blew up in middle school. I think I was still early elementary school. But a lot of the experiences that I learned, I got them at Kyle Middle School, Elementary School, and Jackson Hayes High School. So I knew that I wanted to see my kids have the same best education um, by having them raised here in Kyle. So I made an effort to find a career that I would be able to provide for them and help the community back out.
And what is your career?
My training, I'm a research medical scientist, so I develop a lot of new things for medical technology companies. But this has been a long road to get there. But now I just want to play it back for my community.
Miguel's elementary school was my high school.
Wallace. Now it's Wallace is the middle school. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, take up too much time.
Sorry. It was a good story. I enjoyed it. It was a great story. So yeah, definitely. So my name is Robert Rizo. I'm a fourth generation resident of Kyle. My grandfather came here to Kyle when he was a young man. My grandmother was already here. She's part of the Castillo and Mendez family. So it's kind of my background here in Kyle. So they've been here in Kyle forever. My mother's family was from the Reedville, Martindale area. They were Venegas and Chavez. So that's where I get a lot of the farming in me is from that area as well. But I've enjoyed growing up in Kyle. My mom early on was a community action teacher, so she definitely gave back. She was the example of giving back to the community. So I kind of followed that example, especially once I joined St. Anthony's Catholic Church. I learned what it was like to serve, and mine has been a role of service for the last 30 years. I've served in the community in the Knights of Columbus through the parish. I coached a number of youth sports, football, baseball, softball, basketball, you name it, I've coached it. And it's been great. I love giving back to community. I definitely think of that the role that we have in our community to make it better is to give back, and it's one small good deed at a time, and it's something that I really pride myself on is trying to make our community better. But other than that, we're a humble family. My grandfather was an early cattle rancher. He had about 30 head of cattle here in Kyle. He had a small piece of property, but he also had agreement with the Nance family, so he ran cattle on the Nance ranch as well. So it's kind of what our background here was, ranching and farming.
And are you a rancher or farmer now?
No, I'm actually in commercial property management because up in Austin. But my father and my uncles were all into the service industry. So my dad was a carpenter and a welder. My uncle was a plumber, and my other uncle was an electrician. And I was the cheapest help they could find. So they definitely gave me a great background, which propelled me into the role that I am right now. I do oversee a lot of commercial properties in Austin, and it's been what I've been with the same family for 30 years working in Austin.
Did you work on my house or was that your father?
Probably my father.
Okay.
Probably my father, yeah. Definitely. My background's all commercial. So I worked on buildings, and then late now I just manage buildings.
Okay.
Okay, my name is Willie Tenorio Jr. My full name is Guillermo Tenorio, but my dad, they called him Willie, so I was Willie Jr. when I was born. Um, Abel and I basically, you might have guessed we're related to each other. Interesting thing, I think Abel and I were both school board presidents at different times when he was on the board, when I was on the board. Um, my dad was born 1927 here in Kyle, and his his dad Roberto Tenorio was born in 1897 in New Braunfels, but lived almost all his life here in Kyle. And his wife, Roberto's wife, was Cayetana Mendez, and she was born probably a few years before him. And her family was here longer in Kyle than our family was. She's a Mendez, so they've been here a long time. My dad was actually involved in two big pivotal elections in Kyle history, and we can talk about that later if y'all want. But he was involved in the election that brought alcohol to the community, and he was then involved in the election that integrated the schools here. And then my grandfather, I found out, was actually involved in an attempt to integrate the schools way before that, like in the to integrate the schools here in Kyle, like in the maybe I guess in the maybe the 30s or 40s. I'm not sure exactly when that happened. So anyway, that's so we've done a lot of stuff with education here.
Willie's grandfather and my grandfather were brothers.
Your grandfathers were brothers.
His grandfather and my grandfather were brothers.
Okay.
It's good to hear that, Tenorio, about the integration, because my father was very active in that aspect. When I started school, I had to go to Hispanic school here in Kyle because we're not allowed to go to the Anglo school. And my dad, along with Dr. Hector Garcia, who was a civil rights activist, who later got the freedom of Medal of Freedom from LBJ for being so active here in that aspect. But my dad was very involved with the integration of schools here in Kyle. Because, like I said, my dad was very adamant about education. I can still recall my dad telling me, "Look, if you try stunts at home, at school, I'll be here waiting for you." And so I'd make sure that
Now, who was your dad?
Demencio Castilleja.
Yeah.
Demencio Castilleja. My mother's name was Rosa.
Yeah.
And they were very, very alone here in town. But like I said, he was very active. That he worked for the railroad here in Kyle for about 30 years.
He's not still alive.
No, it's not. But I recall here my coach Mo Johnson, because back in the late 50s, 60s, the state knew Kyle is a basketball powerhouse. We were known for basketball. That's why I ended up having my knees replaced. So, but Dad was very, very adamant about education. And I look around here, I spend a lot of time in the libraries those days.
Did you?
A lot of time. And it carried me forward because when I left Kyle in 61 because my dad got transferred to San Marcos to the railroad depot over there. And so I graduated from San Marcos, but I sure hated to leave Kyle because of my basketball deal especially and the good teachers I had. But after that, I joined the military. I was in the Air Force 4 years during the Vietnam War. Came back home and decided to go to California. And I ended up working for in Santa Monica for GT, which is now Verizon. At that time, corporations helped you a lot with tuition aid. So I was very fortunate that I attended Pepperdine for my BA in management from Pepperdine University. Later got transferred to Dallas, and that's where I got my MBA from Dallas University. I finished my career with Verizon, and I worked about every field in Verizon, all the way from finance to engineering. I did everything. And I finished my career there. Then I ended up 12 years as a college professor in the Dallas and Tarrant County Community Colleges, teaching finance, marketing, business, management. And after I retired from that, I decided to come back home, back to Kyle. But I didn't recognize it.
Did your parents realize what a prestigious university Pepperdine was? Did they know?
No, they didn't know. But Dad told me, said, "Look, I don't want you to work as hard as I did. So you have a choice. You can spend the rest of your life in the fields or get educated." So I decided to take the latter. So it's in last Saturday when we had those tables, I had a table there and I had a book that my brother gave me. It's called Wishing for the Stars, about this migrant worker that became an astronaut. And my brother bought it for me because we can relate a lot to that because we went through the same experiences he did. A lot at that time, a lot of discrimination and a lot of roads placed before us. But we were adamant, and we went around those roads and got educated. And I still recall my brother being in the cotton fields, looking at the airplanes, and we used to talk to each other and say, "I wonder what kind of people ride those airplanes." So, not knowing that later on, me and him be in an airplane almost every week. So anyway, it was great. And the reason I came back to Kyle because I still recall the people who lived here. We were very supportive of each other, and we helped each other during the bad times and good times. And so all those good memories, that's why I decided to come back home again.
Do you remember the word family?
Yes, La Familia. That was so important here.
That's By my word. What year were you born?
1944.
Okay.
But I still recall my coach Mo Johnson said, "Look, fame is like a star, the shining star. It shines for only a period of time. Take advantage of it before it fades away." I never forget that.
That's wonderful. So I wanted to ask, obviously there were some difficult times for some of you growing up Hispanic in a world where maybe Hispanics weren't treated well. I wanted to know your opinion on whether things have improved. And I don't know, any advice you have or thoughts on this topic.
So I'd like to chime in here. So, you know,
That's a
when I
difficult question. And one of the answers is if you draw a circle and you're in that circle, you see everything outside, but you don't see anything inside the circle. If you're outside the circle, you can see what's going in inside the circle. So that's kind of like how I was. If I didn't realize discrimination because I was born and raised here, my parents were born and raised here, so we were in a circle. But friends of mine and other people that came later were looking from the outside in, and it depends how you look at it or what but it's not only here; it's everywhere. It's something that you can't change. It's it was back then, and it's still on. It's so uh, that's a tough question. I went with school with her older sister.
Oh, I'm the older sister.
No, it's back then.
Oh, my younger sister.
But that's it's difficult to answer a question. Sure, there's everything, and but when you try to answer something, uh, you're going to create something else, and it's a hard
so I think for me being my parents both worked, so it got to the point where life happened where you didn't have stay-at-home moms anymore. Now you had a mom working and a dad working. So I kind of grew up during the week with my grandparents up in Martindale who only spoke Spanish. So my mom's parents only spoke Spanish. So I grew up with them speaking a lot of Spanish. It was until I got into elementary, when I got into kindergarten, that I really struggled because I spoke English and Spanish. I had really mastered the craft of Spanglish. So definitely was really deterred by the teachers early on. Didn't really want you speaking any Spanish, so I had a hard time in elementary and first grade. It was really tough. I think it was like in second or third grade when they started thinking that Spanish was probably really really good. But by now I had already had a disflavor for Spanish, so I didn't speak any more Spanish. I just started speaking English all through elementary, middle school, and then it was in high school where I started picking up the language again. I did it through music. It was Tejano music that I was introduced to. I still remember I drove up to Waco to see a band playing. It was a band called La Mafia. It's the first time I had listened to Tejano music, and I was hooked after that. But I couldn't speak the language, so I definitely started teaching myself a little bit. Started learning the songs and just mimicking them really because I didn't know what they were saying. It was after high school where I really picked up Spanish, so I immersed myself in the language of Spanish. So I'm self-taught. So
Your parents didn't speak it to you at all.
nope, nope, not at home. So we were definitely pushed to speak English. So we spoke a lot of English. Now they really encourage it in the school. So that's the beauty of it. But it was after high school that I started working in the workforce. That was around a lot of Hispanics, a lot of people from Mexico, and I got lucky. I was working with a gentleman from Monterrey that was very educated, and him and I would work on his English and he worked on my Spanish, and I actually immersed myself in it. I would pick up everything I could pick up to read. I would listen to the radio stations and watch the novelas. It's funny because I was telling my wife when I first started speaking Spanish, I would come up and say, "¿Cómo estás? How you doing?" It's like, but we had a good time. But really, it was tough I mean, because I definitely felt like if you spoke Spanish, you were looked down on. So it was something that I didn't do early on. And I actually picked up later. I'm glad that I'm very fluent in Spanish now. But I immersed myself in it. So I self-taught myself Spanish, and I'm glad I did. I've tried teaching my kids. It's a little tougher when they're just not. It's not the main language that you need to know. But I've always encouraged them to pick it up because it's great to know more than one language, especially because you're here in Texas. I mean, we definitely have a big influence now of Spanish speakers, and it's great to be able to help them as well and to be able to navigate throughout the state. It's important, but yeah, it was a little tough growing up when you're a kid, Hispanic kid, just speaking a little bit of Spanish, a little bit of English. Just wasn't the same as it now. Now it's encouraged, and I'm great. So I think there is a change there because now they definitely encourage you to speak Spanish and learn a multiple languages. So I have a friend of mine whose daughter speaks Spanish, English, and has Japanese as well, and fluent in all three. So and they're currently living in Japan. So it's really cool. But
One
no,
of the things that of course, he came late. It was presumed that you didn't speak English. Okay, so when you start school, you didn't go to first grade. You went to primer. Okay, because to learn to speak English, even though you could speak it, but it was just presumed that you didn't know it. So that's the reason most Hispanics graduated school. The ones that graduated school graduated 19 or 20 years of age because they were actually going to school for 13 years instead of 12. And if they were born after September 1, then you got to sit out a year. And so that would get into 19 and 20 years of age by the time you graduate. I was fortunate because I was born in July, so I got to start. Even though I went to primer, I went 13 years. I still graduated 18, but that was and back then most of the Anglos graduated at 17. The ones that were born before September 1, because they didn't have to go to primer, and it was different, but that's the way it was.
Yeah.
Was Risa Milholland ever your teacher, or was she
Sorry,
Miss Milholland?
no, Holland was
Was she one of your teachers?
yes,
Was she?
Miss Mill Holland. Of course, Miss Rogers was a fourth grade teacher. But senior,
That primer grade.
who was that?
Miss McGee.
Oh, I never had McKee.
I couldn't remember when she taught that.
She taught. I think she was fourth grade, but there was two classes of fourth grade, and uh, I didn't go to her. It was I had graduated my English by then, so I got to go.
Right.
Yeah, and
Yeah, because I remember, there were
the young ones that would go to West Texas to pick cotton stuff would get a low starters, and so they would get McGee because their English wasn't uh, where it should have been.
would you come in from picking fruit or cotton or something?
I was fortunate. My mother never let me pick cotton.
Oh,
I never. My brothers did, but my mother babied me.
You missed a great experience.
I would go out in the fields and would pick and make little
Mounts.
mounts of cotton for her, and she would put them in her bag. But I went to school, and
but you picked around here. You picked cotton around here.
Yes. Yes.
But it's like where?
everything east of 35. Of course,
Okay.
35 wasn't there yet, but
Yeah.
everything east was
Yeah.
nothing but cotton fields.
Can I say,
Mhm.
what was the question that you asked? Oh,
I don't know exactly.
Did you suffer as an Hispanic? Or
Well,
what
I
was
didn't
your
ask specifically about that, but I did ask if anything had changed.
So, if you don't mind, I'd like to kind of add to that a little
Sure.
bit. I think everything is a perspective. So, Domingo's parents, the children here had to go to a Mexican school before they went to the American school. Well, where I come from in South Texas, the same thing. But my grandfather was invited to come from Mexico. I have his over 100-year-old diploma, and he was invited to come and open up a private school for the Mexican families of South Texas. And it was with great pride that we went to school. We spoke Spanish grammatically correct. We were better educated than the kids that were going to the American school, I guess, so to speak. There were 4 rows. Each row was a class. We were taking things like astronomy. My brother was taking calculus. My grandfather died. He was a professor, but he died of not cancer, abscess, got an abscess, got pneumonia and died. And so my grandmother was left with these 5 sons. And so the school stayed on, and all of us had to go to school there before we went to the American school.
Where was that?
Hebbronville, Texas. But we had a lot of pride in going to school there. When we spoke to a professor or a teacher back then, we didn't sit, we stood up. And we brought that integrity to the American school. Those kids didn't have the wonderful teachings that we had. So I think that we can say that we come from a very proud background. And it's all about a perspective. Your parents can make you feel bad because you don't speak Spanish, or they can make you feel bad because you don't speak Spanish, or you can say with pride, I spoke Spanish before I learned English. So I think it's all about a perspective. Thank you.
I would get Mr. Daisy was a Spanish teacher. I would get A's in Spanish, but I get F in citizenship because we argued all the time. You're talking about a private school. In public school here, what they taught us was Castilian Spanish. They didn't teach us
The same thing in South Texas.
So we weren't used to Castilians was spoken in Spain back then, and we were, we had no
Teachers
clue of
probably
what.
didn't know the difference.
I'm sorry.
Your Anglo teachers probably didn't know the difference.
No, like a pen, pen in Spanish, we call it a pluma. In Castilian, it's stilográfica.
Graphica.
Same thing with stationery, desk. No, in Castilian, it's pupitre. So we had to learn those things, and you argue, and because we weren't raised that way. So that's what I'm saying. And yeah, I could master the language, but I couldn't. I'd have to duke it out with the professor. But it was very different. And you're right. You take pride and to this day, I go to Mexico City or somewhere else. I opened up a business, and I had an associate that was from Veracruz, and he had an office in Mexico City. And I traveled quite a bit back there. And to this day, I get people and say, "Where'd you learn Spanish?" Because you speak it the way they speak, and here, it, a lot of people call it Tex-Mex. I speak it the same way. It doesn't matter. We understand each other. We can relate to each other and understand each other. But some people are surprised that you can speak Spanish, and we do it at home. We do it at home, and then I'll be talking, and I'll rattle off in Spanish. She rattles back in English. I'll rattle back in English. She rattles back in Spanish, and we never skip a beat. It's the way of life. So yeah, we take pride. It's a lot of pride, and you go through a lot of things. Like I say, you get into that circle, and you stand outside the circle. You see a lot of things. And you know, Coach Kimbrell, Little Kimbrell.
Yeah.
One day we would have coffee at Mo Johnson's house, and we all had coffee. And one day he asked me, uh, what do you think about this? How would you look at this? I said, well, depends. He says, what do you mean depends? I said, depends what eyes you're looking with. He says, I don't understand. I said, you're looking at it with blue eyes, brown eyes, or black eyes. It depends what eyes you look at it with. And he says, I can't believe he said that. But and it's a lot of truth to it. And you don't say it in a disrespectful manner. And say what it is, because we all look at things different. Yeah. But you're right. There's a lot of pride in being Hispanic. Uh, I don't. I'm not crazy about the word Hispanic. I don't know where it come from.
Yeah, I was
Uh,
always a Mexican. I was never Chicana.
I was always in a Mexican.
Those words were given to us, but what we have in our heart and how we feel in our heart, that's what we really are. And I'm to this day, I consider myself a Mexican. I was brought up a Mexican. The pride of being a Mexican.
But I'm not saying that anything is bad or not,
No.
right? But being raised here, and of course, my dad did a lot of work for her dad, and and the it just uh,
They were also friends.
I'm sorry,
I think they were also friends. Friends.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
Did anyone else want to chime in? I have another question to ask. But
I can go quickly, Willie.
Yeah.
So what I'd say now is there are more opportunities, there are more leaders, there are more role models. And when I was growing up in the 80s, it was starting to transition to becoming a little bit easier, but I had a different perspective. Um, I think that if my parents had raised me in Mexico, I would have had more challenges over there because over there there's more of a judgment of do you have some wealth and do you have schooling. So there's a lot still discriminating factors in some of the other countries. So it was something happening throughout, not just a problem of the country here. So getting here, I knew that if I was going to succeed, I was going to have to work hard and make my own opportunities. So I was determined. I knew that I could learn stuff pretty fast. And I knew that because in middle school, I remember kind of getting really good scores on tests, and teachers would reinforce that, like, Miguel, you're a smart guy. Keep practicing, keep learning. Some things were coming easier to me, and my mom could see that with my other brothers and sisters. They were having more time finishing homework. I was kind of doing it faster. And then, so I also very early, I was bilingual. And I would take home school papers, insurance papers, work compensation, social security papers. And I was kind of at a very early age, I had to grow up fast to translate them. There were very few translators at that time. So I was now in charge of like the family. Like I know my dad was bringing a small check home, but my mom would come to me for the resources. Like, do you understand this? Help me make a phone call. So I would say now, because of the path made by others, when I was able to take advantage of that, yes, there were still some challenges, but those challenges you could kind of still get away with. You would hear the bad words to you every now and then, but I wouldn't let someone take away my value. So because I always felt like there's going to be a time when I'm gonna be really take off, and I wasn't at the right time yet. And then when that time came, I knew, okay, Zuniga, this is what you said you wanted to do. Now do it. And I felt like the pressure was there too. Like either now you had to show that that you could be there, and being first, I felt like the expectation was greater sometimes too, because now people expected more out of you. And even now, I feel pressure because, okay, I'm here. I've done this, I've done that, did the real estate, ran for office, succeeded in science, succeeded in school. So I still feel those pressures, but I feel like I have to continue to work hard and make some progress. because if I don't do it, um, I'll be wasting time that I may not have tomorrow. So all I wanted to really do was show others the path is there, the opportunities are there. Google is here now. You have it on your phone. There are more. So you have more support now than back then. If you need clothes and if you need food, there are programs. But back when I was growing up, we did not even get welfare because we were immigrants and not didn't have a green card yet. So there was challenges that I had to face. I think those challenges made me better. Sometimes I did not like it because I felt I was given an unfair hand. But now I feel like there was a reason for this, and that time came. So that's what I would say to young kids now.
Thank you.
In the first Congress, all you had to do is look at the city council and the composition.
Yeah.
It wasn't like that before.
Yep.
I'd like to ask a question,
Yes.
and we just like hit upon it. The elephant in the room is about politics. And I know that many of you gentlemen are involved in politics or have been in the past. And I'd like to learn something about how hard or easy that was for you because I mean it mattered. It was a big change. I mean in my limited view, that was a tipping point. So if all of y'all could address that, I'd love it. Thank you.
Well, earlier here, they used to impose poll taxes that prevented the Mexican Americans from voting. Now, I was stationed in Montgomery, Alabama, when I was in the Air Force, and there they had a jar full of jelly beans. And if you could guess the right number of jelly beans in there, you were allowed to vote.
Where was that?
In Montgomery, Alabama. Yeah.
Did the little people have to guess the number of jelly beans too?
No. There's a lot of restrictions that have been imposed. But I was exposed to a lot of that. I was stationed there on and off in Montgomery, and I was there when Martin Luther King marched from Selma to Montgomery. I was there. I was exposed to the Cesar Chavez in California when he was trying to improve the lives of the field workers.
Here too.
So I was there also. So I've seen a lot of that. But mostly here I recall here in Kyle, they had the poll taxes, where you had to pay X amount of dollars to be allowed to vote.
$6.
I think it was, yes. It was a lot of money back then.
Oh yes.
Regarding elections, like I said earlier, I was really junior and my dad was really senior, so I'm over here Googling myself just one day, being vain, and my dad shows up, it's not me, it's my dad, and I pull up a dissertation from Texas State. It was before it was South, whatever it's called now, but that was Texas State or whatever it's called, whatever. But back then it was Texas State, and there was a dissertation, and I had my dad, and then I had Mr. Barton in there also too. And Vincent Mo Johnson, and it was talking about how they had worked to do a petition to integrate the school system here before you had to. And so I didn't know that, and I asked my dad about that, and he basically tried to he didn't want to take a lot of credit for it, but it was there in black and white in the dissertation. There had been a lot of it written up about it. And so then my dad told me a story that there wasn't in the dissertation. He told me about my grandfather. So my grandfather, when there was I guess my dad was probably like maybe 10, so probably 1937 or so. My grandfather had tried to integrate the school system here. There was a Roberto Tenorio. And so there was a black school, a white school, and a Mexican school, and they all went to school separate. And so my grandfather wanted to integrate this, so he was trying to get organized, and he couldn't get it done at that point in time. That's part of the reason that I think my dad and Mr. Barton and Mo Johnson tried to do that later.
Yeah.
but my grandfather had started that, and so when he did that,
And tell me again who your grandfather was.
Roberto Tenorio, Roberto,
Robert.
But was he called Robert in the Anglo community?
I'm not sure. I think he was referred to as both. And so I don't know. But
Tell me what he did, Robert
he
Tenorio.
was a grocer and he was a butcher.
I
So,
know. His sister to Susan Blinkus, of course, and Sam and Ross. Sure.
So, and then, so one of the things they did to try to appease my grandfather, because they were trying to, as they let my dad go to the white school, so my dad got to go kind of get a better education because I guess they were trying to you know try to appease my grandfather a bit, and so when my grandfather lost that thing, so my dad went there for a while. He told me he faced a lot of teasing. They didn't really want him there, and there were certain insults they would throw to you back then. But he got a pretty good education. So some of his, like you were talking about, Miss Milholland. Miss Milholland was one of his teachers at one time, and in that original school. And then Miss Wallace was one. The Wallace from here, this school was one of his teachers also. And I remember he would take me. Mrs. Wallace used to come, and she was really old by then. She was in a wheelchair. She'd come to the fair and the squares when I was a little kid. And my dad always would, it was like every year we would see her, and my dad walked me over to her and said, I want you to shake this lady's hand. She was my teacher, and she was a great teacher. And so I got to interact with Mrs. Wallace, who the namesake of this school was.
She talked till she was like 75 years old.
Oh, wow. I don't know.
Long.
She's an amazing person. I'm really glad I got to meet her.
Well, it's not an easy road to politics or to government or to city council government. Early on, did I want to be a politician? Did I want to run for office? No. It's not what my goal started off to be. Mine was one of service. I started off in the city just helping out. Started off coaching kids. I started volunteering around the schools. Next thing you know, I'm part of the St. Anthony's Catholic Church, Knights Columbus, and I took service to a different level. And it definitely was very rewarding for me. I think it was later through my service to the Knights of Columbus and through the church, I started realizing when there was a MySpace and early on Facebook, started seeing a lot of elected officials trying to friend request me, and I didn't understand it because I was like, I'm just Robert Rizzo. I work in Austin. I live here in Kyle, right? So it was kind of really different for me to see all these elected officials trying to be around to get to know who I am, be a part of my group, and I just didn't understand it. But I didn't realize I was actually raising who I was in the community with my service in the community. So I, it was later on that people started asking me if I would run for office, and I used to tell them early on, no. My dad was probably one of my first, I would say, advocates for me to run for office. He used to say, because I would go to church, and he would say the priest had a line, and I had another line on the other side. People wanting to greet me, and it was just my work because I love giving back to the community, and. My dad started saying that one day I was going to be mayor of Kyle, and I used to tell him, "No, that's somebody else, Dad. I'm not. I'm never running for politics." And it just went on. It went on, and finally, people talked me into it. I finally ran for office, and it wasn't easy because the first time I decided to run, I actually got kicked out of the city. so I was,
you pay taxes.
even though we paid taxes, we were on the border. And if you talk to the city, you talk to the county, they would say that if you brought 100 people into a room, 50, 50 of them would say I'm in, 50 would say I'm out. The definer was that I was paying taxes. That should have been the definer. Unfortunately, I got kicked out and wasn't able to run. So I was a little discouraged, but I didn't let it. Actually, it emboldened me a little bit more to run again. So I ended up running against a gentleman who had been on the P&Z and had been part of the city for a long time. and I ran against him. He had a really big pool. I would say, he definitely had a lot more knowledge of running a campaign than I did. But
Can we get a name?
oh, that was Rick Coach. So I ran against Rick Coach, and Rick actually had a lot of knowledge of running campaigns. He knew a lot about the city. He was serving on PNC, and even then, we probably broke every record there was that year because we went against each other. And I don't know if it was us or it could have been that Beto guy that brought everybody to the polls. But anyway, we definitely had the numbers come out, and I felt really good after the election. I lost by 60 votes. We all, each garnered, I think it was, I don't even remember what the number was. It was in the thousands. Everybody told me when I ran for office I needed 500 votes. That went out the window the first day. So, yeah, and it was tough going through the list every day by day, but it was fun. It was a great experience. And actually, I had thought about everything I had learned during that campaign and the do's and don'ts. So one of the things I thought about is maybe helping other people that wanted to run for office because I thought I was done running for office. I was kind of like, you know what, I gave it a good shot. And then a couple of months later, one of the council members, Shane Araby, quits. And I started getting a lot of phone calls and decided to put my name in. I had 3 opponents, and I won flat out the first election with almost 52% of the vote. So no runoff. I started saving the city money right off the bat. No $20,000 runoff. So yeah, it was great. But it wasn't easy. Look, there was a lot of things that went on. I didn't finish college. I started a degree in liberal arts. Unfortunately, life gets in the way. Sometimes I ended up a young father, ended up raising my kids, and when you have kids, you go to work and you make sure you're providing for your children. You're doing all you can for them. But at the same time, I didn't give up on educating myself. I started immersing myself in everything I could. I picked up everything I could to read around me and just learn government from that. I was watching meetings. I was engaged in the community, so I was learning what the needs of the community were as well. So being in Austin in property management, I learned what it was like to work with a city and fight with a city. So it's definitely inspectors, especially, but it definitely got me prepared for the role that I was in. Even though my background now is blue collar, I definitely was prepared to jump into this role of giving back. But I look at it as a role of service. I don't look at the title that I was given because titles are fleeting. They don't last. People won't even remember you once you're gone. It's the work that you do while you're there. That's the important part of it. So one of the things I really propelled myself was to leave the seat in a better place than when I got it. And Shane had done a decent job, but I wanted to propel that a lot more. So I really immersed myself into the role and worked really, really hard, put in a lot of hours. I think I was doing like 40-hour weeks and then doing a 40-hour job as well. So I definitely propelled myself in there, but it's not always easy. There was a lot of roadblocks. A lot of people think that I didn't have the education to serve in the role. That's one of the things I heard. The other thing was that I was a blue collar background. Another thing that probably deterred a little bit is that I was just a young Hispanic kid from Kyle, didn't, and what business did I have running for council? Honestly, that was the question I asked myself, and I remember the first thought that went through my head after I got elected that night, and said, "Boy, I really hope I don't let the people down." That was the first thing I thought
So when I was growing up, I was inspired by 2 cousins and an uncle in Mexico. They went for political office and they were in Mexico. They were mayors of Nuevo León. And Nuevo León was a village, small town. It didn't have running water, so the people were drinking out of wells and just I would sometimes see tanks that they were getting buckets out of. And they invested over there, they lobbied, and I remember they got the governor to set aside an earmark for water. And I remember that because when I was living here, we would make trips back to visit family, and I would sort of start to look at that city was getting better. And it got better because it needed water first. So once that water came, it gave that livelihood. Now it's a like retail generating city, and it's also a tourist city. So a city in the high mountains now becomes like a progression of the people now come back. They've bought homes there. They've developed it all because some of my relatives had that set foresight that they needed a plan for this, and they got the best roads down there. So I was just a young teenager when I would hear this, how my uncle, my cousins were running for office, and everybody was proud about, wow, the Zunigas really did something. So I knew my dad had made a mark here. and he'd worked very hard, and he'd given me that opportunity. So I knew I want to make a mark, um, but I also want to help the community. And then when I bought the house, started to see how my taxes were getting paid, how my schools were getting zoned. I felt like there was uh, a gap, and some of those gaps I was starting to see when I was trying to get more involved with the school. I was starting to see fewer from my community there, or the programs were lessened, and we were not getting the resources we needed. So I got on PTAs here in Kyle, and I started to make a few changes, started to advocate and get things done. And then I said, why why do I need to stop here? Maybe there's more. And then I looked at some street lights here in Kyle. I thought I saw traffic was bad. I saw the wastewater was affecting my neighborhood. And I was informing residents that didn't understand how that wastewater was getting dumped into the Plum Creek. So I took it upon myself to learn more about from the scientific background, the nutrients that were being dumped, the levels, why they needed a permit, what was the capacity, how we were going to expand it even further. So that really kind of woke me. So I got a little bit woke, or I did get woke, and I said, okay, um, something needs to be done. And so I just think that was kind of what got me ready. Now, it's hard because I started later with my kids. They are still in school, and you have to make time in a career, in a demanding career. But I've also looked at there's not what I see young people getting involved. So I felt like I could just make excuses and say, let others do it, or with the preparation that I had, maybe I needed to speak up and get more involved and try to help where I could and serve the community where I could. And so that's where I am today. And I had to run against Mr. Rizzo. He looked very hard, very hard first campaign. But
He ran against me too once too.
Nuevo Leon is a state of Mexico right below Monterrey.
Dear, what
The
Texas city would you go through to get?
You'd go through Laredo and go south, and
Okay, is it on the way to Monterey?
it's south of Monterrey,
South.
south of Monterrey. So
I just have one final question, and we'll try to keep it
Mhm.
short because we've been here almost an hour now. But let's say I'm putting together a museum of Kyle history and heritage center, let's say, and you're asked to make a suggestion for something that you think should be included that would represent your history, whether it's an item or an activity or something. How would you want us to remember your heritage here in Kyle? I don't know if I worded that well. You get to pick one exhibit or area there, and what would you include?
Well, mine would be the progress from building doing manual labor all the way to education to be, in my case, working in cornfields and end up a college professor.
Yes,
That type of aspect.
so inspiring. Anyone else?
William, I'm thinking about what I want. And I said,
Well, this may be not the first thing I would pick, but I'm just would like to be. I like to be contrarian,
Mhm.
and so I want to pick something from a part of history that I think people forgot,
Mhm.
but had made a big difference in Kyle, and that was when they built that prison.
Mhm.
That was a big deal here because the economy was really poor. Nobody really wanted to move here
Mhm.
at that time. You know, now you see it as a bustling place, but there was no economic activity. The biggest economic activity we had here before that had been the cement plant in Buda.
Mhm.
And that was a big deal because it brought a lot of jobs. And so there was a big deal to bring that prison. It was a private prison. And back then they didn't have as much of a stigma as I guess they do now, but it did bring a lot of jobs because a lot of people got a job here where they didn't have to go commute somewhere and they were getting paid a lot more money than they had ever been paid in their life here. And I knew a lot of people who worked there. It was a big deal. I know one of the reasons I think I remember that is because my cousin Sandra was the mayor at the time. And so she was one of the ones that brought Sandra Tenorio, she brought that here. And there was pretty big fight about it. They were pretty. I remember I was a kid, and they were some of my the classmates of some of my classmates. Their parents were quoted in the newspaper saying some really ugly things about her, and and but she did a re-election and she won by a landslide, and so the people supported that, but there was a lot of people who didn't want anything to change here, and or at least not to change in a way that didn't approve of, and so it changed. That's something that really changed the landscape of it here, because then people started thinking about in terms of, well, can Kyle grow in different ways, and I think that kind of started the little mindset shift here.
Thank you. And can I interject something? We stole that prison from San Marcos.
I would say the St. Anthony's Church was a centerpiece for me growing up because I always remember the fiestas there and how the community would rally around for the sponsors, and all the kids would get together and play there. So the church has really been central here in Kyle for the Hispanic community. That's kind of been like where the barbecue plates are, the fundraisers are. And maybe to me, from my experience, Kyle Elementary, the library, because I remember in the summers not having opportunities to go and enjoy vacations, but coming to the library and taking a few books on would be something that always let me have a strong imagination. So those two things to me growing up.
Do you remember when the Catholic Church was over?
Yes, before
That
it was
was over there
remodeled.
across from
Yeah.
CPS.
Yes, tremendous property, but I
I
sort of
I was an altar boy there.
what
I was an altar boy there.
the fiestas. You're talking about fiestas, right?
No,
The church. Are you talking about the church? The Catholic Church. Yeah, yeah.
I passed I-35.
Yeah. Yes.
Where AutoZone is at.
And the big, yes, we say so.
Yes.
Yes.
We used to show movies and all
Yes.
this stuff.
And if we had more time, I had planned to ask about that.
I would like to
And
see
Daisy's
Kyle
dances.
learn from San Antonio. Kyle, to me, being born and raised here and living here all my life, it's a sleeper. I remember the sign across from the post office used to say 888 population, 888, and it's over 50,000 now. But it's sleeper. There's uh, no manufacturing, no economy, no nothing. Uh, San Antonio was the same way. San Antonio never suffered through an economic uh, uh, crisis because it was military and the military and the other part where people just go there like Wimberley to see what
Tourism.
tourists. It was tourists and military, so it never suffered any economic when uh, when everything fell apart. I like to, and then now they finally had to change their mindset, and now they've got Toyota, they got Volkswagen, they've got all these manufacturing things in San Antonio. San Antonio is a booming uh, town for the Mexican people because it's 80% of the population in San Antonio is Hispanic.
How much?
80%, over 80% here.
Is it? Is it?
And the but if we could learn what they did and how they did it, it would be great. And get away from this sleeper syndrome, and because that's what we are. And there's no there's nothing, but just houses. People commute. That's 335 is it's crazy because everybody goes from Buda and Kyle to Austin to work. Uh, but that's what I would like to see us learn from other, and And that's got to be something good about Mexicans in San Antonio. If they can turn that city into what it is now, uh, I don't know why we couldn't do it here.
All right. Well, thank you. Thank you all for coming out tonight, and thank you as well.